She sat in the last row of the small community hall, trying to make herself invisible, even though she had every right to be there. People walked past her without a glance, busy finding seats for their children or looking for familiar faces to chat with. The place was full of soft echoes, the kind that float around a hall before a show starts. Chairs scraped the floor, someone tuned a violin at the back, and a group of young performers were laughing and talking loudly near the stage. In all that noise, she was just another quiet person waiting for her turn to play. She kept her hands folded in her lap, her fingers tapping lightly against each other as if they were practicing a rhythm only she knew. She had come early, hoping to calm her nerves, but instead she watched how people gathered in small circles. They talked about who would perform first, who practiced the hardest, and whose parents had invited the most guests. No one mentioned her. No one asked her name. It was as if she was a guest who accidentally wandered into a space not meant for her. The old upright piano stood near the center of the stage, lit by a single warm spotlight. She looked at it again and again, imagining herself sitting there. She had played better pianos before, but this one had a charm to it. It looked old and worn, like it had stories of its own. The keys were slightly yellow, the wood had scratches, and she could see where other players had rested their hands over the years. Still, she felt a strange connection to it. It's like she understood the tired beauty it carried. While waiting, she listened to the host, who was busy organizing the sequence of performances. The host rushed from one side of the room to the other, flipping through papers, calling out names. Children ran to their parents holding small music sheets. Some parents looked worried, some excited, and some simply tired. A few young performers practiced their pieces on imaginary keyboards in their laps. Every few minutes, someone looked at the door to see if the special guest had arrived. The special guest was a well-known maestro, a man the entire town respected. His presence alone made the event feel grand. People whispered about him as if he were a legend, someone important enough to change a young musician's future. She heard them talk about how he rarely attended such local recitals. Some said he was only there because one of the advanced students had impressed him recently. She did not expect him to notice her at all. She did not come for attention. She came because music was something she needed to express. Even if only a few people listened, a group of parents sitting 2 rows ahead began discussing the performers. They talked about their children, their teachers, and who practiced the hardest. She heard one of them mention that the recital might run long, so hopefully the weaker performers were placed near the end. They laughed lightly, thinking it was harmless. She felt a small pinch in her chest, wondering if she would be one of those weaker performers in their minds. She glanced around the hall again. The lights were simple, just a few bulbs hanging from the ceiling. The stage curtain was faded at the edges, and the wooden floor had marks from years of use. The chairs were folded metal ones, and they creaked when someone leaned back too far. It was a small, ordinary place, yet to her, it felt like a big moment. She had practiced for weeks. She spent late nights with her keyboard at home, replaying the same melody until it felt like her own voice. She didn't tell many people she was performing today. Only one friend knew, and even that friend couldn't make it. She didn't mind. She had learned a long time ago that not everyone needed to see her. For it to matter, the maestro finally entered the hall quietly through a side door. He had a calm presence, walking slowly with a small notebook in hand. The audience turned their heads as he took a reserved seat near the front. The host hurried to greet him, smiling too wide, speaking too quickly. People whispered and pointed from behind their programs. She watched him from afar. He didn't look like someone who came to judge. He looked more like someone who came to observe, someone who listened deeply. The recital began. The first performer, a young boy, hurried onto the stage and played a simple piece. The audience nodded politely. The second performer played a longer, more complex melody. There were a few small mistakes, but the parents clapped loudly anyway. As each performer finished, the host made gentle announcements, praising their effort. She waited patiently, her eyes drifting to the program in her hands. She searched for her name, but she didn't see it listed anywhere. For a moment, she wondered if she had misunderstood something. Maybe she wasn't scheduled. Maybe they forgot her. She checked again, scanning each line carefully. Her name wasn't there. She felt a small wave of worry, but she didn't stand up. She didn't want to make a scene. She decided to wait a little longer. Maybe the host had a separate list. Maybe there was a simple mistake. As the recital went on, she watched the performers closely. She admired their courage. Some of them were confident, playing with strong fingers and steady hearts. Others were nervous, their hands shaking, but they still pushed through. She felt their emotions as if they were her own. Music had a way of connecting people, even when they didn't know each other. Near the back of the hall, a group of older students gathered. They spoke loudly, comparing techniques, talking about music schools, auditions, and future plans. They seemed sure of themselves, as if they already knew their paths. She listened quietly, feeling different from them. Not better, not worse, just different. She played for a reason that was personal, not for competition. Time passed slowly. She held her small music sheet between her fingers, smoothing out its edges over and over. The paper was slightly bent at the corner from being handled too much. She knew the piece by heart, but holding the sheet gave her comfort. It was a reminder that she was prepared, that she belonged here, even if no one noticed her. Finally, the host came to the end of the listed performers and announced a short break. People stood up, stretched, and began chatting again. She remained seated, unsure what to do. Her heart felt heavy, like she might not get a chance to play after all. She watched the stage one more time, trying not to feel disappointed. When the host passed near her row, she gently stood and approached them. She spoke softly, explaining that she was scheduled to perform but didn't see her name. The host blinked, surprised, quickly flipping through the papers again. After a moment, their face changed. They realized the mistake. They apologized hurriedly, explaining that her name must have been misplaced or accidentally skipped. They assured her she would perform right after the break. She nodded politely, stepping back to her seat. She didn't feel angry. Mistakes happen. But she did feel something shift inside her. More than ever, she wanted her music to speak for her. If they hadn't seen her before, maybe they would hear her now. The break ended, and people slowly returned to their seats. The maestro sat quietly, tapping his pen against his notebook. The hall settled again, though not completely. Some people were still chatting softly. The host announced her name at last. For a second, no one reacted, because most people had no idea who she was. She stood slowly, adjusting her sweater, and walked toward the stage. Her steps were quiet, but in her heart they felt loud. She could feel eyes on her, not curious, not impressed, just indifferent. She climbed the small steps and approached the piano. Up close, it looked even older than she expected. She placed her music sheet on the stand, though she knew she wouldn't need it. She sat down and adjusted the bench carefully, making sure she was centered. She ran her hands lightly over the keys, feeling their texture. The hall continued to settle. Some people crossed their arms. Some looked at their phones. A few whispered about whether the recital would end soon. None of them knew what she carried inside her. None of them knew the melodies she had shaped with patience, emotion, and quiet strength. She took one slow breath. Then she placed her fingers gently on the keys. And at that moment, even before she played the first note, she knew something in her life was about to change. She sat at the piano, her hands resting lightly on the keys, but she did not start playing right away. She needed a moment to breathe, to let the room exist around her, to settle the small storm inside her chest. People in the audience shifted in their seats, expecting another simple performance. No one leaned forward with anticipation. No one watched her with curiosity. It was as if she was just another filler in the long list of performers. But sitting there, she felt something different, a small spark of determination, something she had carried with her for weeks. She remembered the long nights she practiced alone, the soft glow of her small lamp on the keyboard, the way her fingers sometimes trembled from tiredness but refused to stop. Those quiet moments, unseen by anyone, were what brought her here. She closed her eyes for a brief second. The hall was warm, filled with the fading smell of the pastries people bought during the break. Somewhere in the back, someone whispered, and a chair creaked. The old piano felt familiar under her hands. She lightly touched a few keys, almost like greeting an old friend. When she finally pressed the first note, it came out soft, gentle, like a whisper. It drifted across the hall without force, but with meaning. At first, no one reacted. A few people were still looking at phones or adjusting jackets. But then the second note followed, and the third, and slowly, a small thread of attention began to form. Her melody was simple at the beginning, soft footsteps on a quiet street. Each note carried a personal touch, shaped by her emotions more than technique. She played with a kind of honesty that didn't demand attention, but invited it. The maestro, who had been sitting calmly with his notebook half open, lifted his head slightly. He didn't show any strong reaction, just a subtle shift, like he sensed something unusual in the way she touched the keys. She continued, unaware of his growing interest. To her, nothing mattered except the music she carried inside her. Her fingers moved gently, flowing from one chord to the next. She did not rush. She did not try to impress. She played with a quiet sincerity that was rare, as the melody built slowly. A few people in the audience finally paused their conversations. The tone of the piano felt warm and alive, even though it was old. The slightly uneven keys gave her peace, a kind of fragile beauty. She remembered the small room where she practiced at home, the thin walls. The shaky table where she placed her metronome, the window that let in the street noise. She remembered how she stopped sometimes to listen to the rain or the distant sound of children playing outside. All those moments became part of her music. Every emotion she had tucked away came through her fingertips. The hall began to quiet. It wasn't sudden. It was like the air slowly settled around her. Even the children who had been restless earlier stopped fidgeting. A woman in the second row looked up from her bag, surprised by the softness filling the room. Still, she didn't notice any of this. Her world at that moment was just the piano and the melody she carried in her heart. She leaned slightly forward, her eyes half closed. Letting the music guide her hands, the maestro leaned back in his chair, his expression changing again. He recognized something in her playing, something real. He had listened to hundreds of young performers, many talented, many skilled, but only a few had that natural emotional connection. He wasn't impressed yet, but he wasn't ignoring her anymore. She moved into the second part of her piece, where the rhythm became slightly more complex. Her fingers picked up speed, not too fast, not dramatic, but confident. The notes flowed like a gentle stream starting to move with intention. People in the audience turned their heads, finally noticing her presence. One man who had been scrolling through his phone stopped and lifted his eyes. Confused as to why the hall was so quiet again, she shifted her posture a little, letting her left hand create a soft, steady foundation while her right hand danced above it. The sound grew richer, deeper, as if the piano was waking up from a long sleep. A young girl sitting in the third row stared at her with wide eyes. She nudged her mother and whispered something, pointing toward the stage. The mother nodded, her attention now fixed as well. The performer herself felt none of this. She was lost in her own world, remembering the first time she had played this melody at midnight when the house was quiet. She remembered how the music had felt like a friend, someone who listened when she didn't have the words. The hall was nearly silent now, except for the soft echo of each note spreading across the wooden floor and bouncing gently off the walls. She sensed the shift in the room, not because she heard them listening, but because the air felt different. Like the hall itself was holding its breath. She could feel the old piano responding to her touch. Every note felt alive, every chord warm. Even the imperfections, the faint buzzing sound from one of the lower keys, the slight delay in one of the higher ones, felt like part of the moment. The maestro slowly lowered the pen he had been tapping against his notebook. His eyes followed the movement of her hands. He noticed her technique was not showy or polished in the way trained performers usually displayed, but she played with emotion, with depth, with something that couldn't be taught in a classroom. Her melody reached a point where it softened again, almost like a sigh. It felt as though she was telling a personal story without speaking. The audience listened quietly, pulled in without realizing it. She remembered moments from her life as she played, times she felt unseen, times she sat alone with her music because it was the only way she understood her feelings. She remembered small joys too, like the warm sunlight on her window, or the laughter of neighbors drifting through the walls. All these memories came through her fingertips. Shaping each note, her fingers slowed slightly as she approached the next section. She breathed in, letting the emotions settle, then continued with careful control. She didn't play loudly, but the audience leaned closer anyway. As if afraid to miss a single sound, a man in the front row took off his glasses and cleaned them slowly. Not because they were dirty, but because he felt something shifting in the hall and didn't want to look away. The older students in the back stopped talking. One of them raised an eyebrow, surprised. They hadn't expected anything special from her. They didn't even know who she was. But now they watched quietly, wondering how they had overlooked her. Her hands moved with more passion, more clarity. She curved her fingers gently, letting every note settle before moving to the next. She wasn't showing off. She wasn't trying to compete. She was simply expressing something true for the first time since she sat down. She looked at the audience, though only for a second. She didn't look for approval. She just wanted to feel the moment, to understand where she stood. Then she turned her eyes back to the keys, feeling lighter. The maestro exhaled slowly, almost inaudibly. He wasn't frozen yet, not in shock or admiration, but he knew this shouldn't be ignored. There was something rare growing in her performance, something that made him pay closer attention. She reached the part of the melody where the notes rose gently, like a question being asked softly. Her right hand moved up the keyboard, creating a fragile, floating sound. Her left hand supported it with steady, warm chords. Someone in the back gasped quietly, not loudly, not dramatically, just a small sound of surprise. The hall didn't feel ordinary anymore. It felt like something meaningful was taking place. She didn't speed up. She didn't slow down. She simply let the music flow naturally, the way she had practiced countless times. Her heart guided her more than her mind. She didn't think about mistakes. She didn't think about who was watching. She only thought about the story she wanted the music to tell. Her melody moved into a gentle transition, like turning a page softly. This was where the emotion deepened. Her fingers pressed the keys with more intention. The warm sound filled the room, almost like a soft blanket settling over everyone. The maestro's expression softened. He understood now. She wasn't just playing notes. She was communicating something many performers struggled to do, even after years of training. People in the hall didn't speak, didn't move much. Even the smallest sounds, like someone adjusting their sleeve, felt out of place. They were all drawn to her, even if they didn't fully understand why. She continued with a sense of peace. She felt the shift in the room, but it didn't distract her. It encouraged her. Her confidence grew in a quiet, steady way. She sat a little straighter. Her hands moved with more assurance, and still she remained humble, gentle. Focused, the music carried her, surrounded her, and became her voice. She didn't look like someone who had been ignored minutes earlier. She didn't look like someone forgotten on the list. She looked like someone who belonged on that stage, someone whose presence was finally beginning to be felt as she played the final notes of this section. The audience remained still, waiting for what she would do next. And she, lost in her own world yet completely connected to the moment, knew that her melody was only just beginning to unfold. The hall was so quiet that she could almost hear her own heartbeat. It wasn't the silence of people waiting for something ordinary. It was the kind of silence that appeared only when something unexpected began to take shape. It's something that slowly pulled every person into the same moment. Her fingers continued moving over the keys with gentle confidence, carrying the melody into a deeper, more emotional space. She didn't think about the audience, or the maestro, or anyone watching her. Instead, she thought about the feeling inside her chest, the emotion that rose each time she played this piece alone at home. She had played it so many times that it felt like breathing. But here on the stage, it carried new weight. Every note felt like a small truth finally being spoken out loud. With the first soft shift in her melody, more heads turned toward the stage. The whispers faded until there were none. Even the sound of someone adjusting their seat seemed too loud for the moment. The air felt heavy, but in a peaceful way, as if the entire hall was wrapped in the music she created. Her left hand dropped to a lower register, producing a warm, deep sound that filled the space beautifully. It was the kind of sound that made people sit up a little straighter without realizing it. Her right hand followed with delicate notes that floated above the deeper ones like tiny lights in the dark. The maestro's eyes sharpened, focusing completely on her. He had heard thousands of young players, some talented, some skillful, some disciplined, but very few played with this kind of quiet honesty. She wasn't performing to impress. She wasn't trying to show off. She was simply speaking through music. She leaned slightly closer to the keys, her hair falling softly near her face as the music grew more intimate. Her breath matched the rhythm, steady and controlled. The piano's old frame seemed to support her, its worn keys responding to her touch as if the instrument itself had been waiting for someone like her. People in the back row, who earlier didn't even notice she was on stage, now leaned forward. A boy who had been sitting cross-legged on the floor near the aisle turned his head slowly, his wide eyes fixed on her hands. A group of older students who had been talking among themselves stood silently. Surprised by the unexpected shift in the room, she continued, letting the melody rise just a little, like a small flame that slowly brightens. Her fingers flowed smoothly from one note to the next, each one carrying emotion. She allowed herself to feel every sound, the softness, the warmth, the small ache hidden inside the tune. She wasn't thinking about how she looked or whether anyone liked her. She wasn't even thinking about her technique. She was only thinking about the story she wanted to tell through her music. A story she once kept hidden from everyone. Her thoughts drifted back briefly to the times when she practiced in silence, not wanting anyone in the house to hear her. She remembered the nights she stayed awake, unable to sleep, sitting at her keyboard in the dark with only the moonlight touching the keys. Those moments felt lonely back then, but now she understood they were the moments that shaped her. They gave her the strength to play the way she did now. The melody shifted again, a gentle turn, as if the music was lifting itself up from a quiet place. Her fingers moved faster, but not too fast, just enough to show a spark inside her. The audience felt it instantly. Some people sat a little straighter, some folded their hands together. Some simply watched silently with expressions that softened. The maestro's lips pressed together in concentration. He had been taking small notes earlier, but now his notebook lay forgotten on his lap. His entire attention was on her. He wasn't judging anymore. He was listening. Her right hand danced lightly across the higher notes, creating a shimmering sound that echoed softly in the hall. Her left hand balanced it with steady, grounding tones. The two hands worked together like they shared a secret language. She could feel the peace building. With every measure, her confidence grew. She didn't need applause. She didn't need praise. She only needed this moment, this chance to share what music meant to her. A woman in the second row wiped a single tear from her cheek. She didn't know why she felt emotional. She didn't even know the girl on stage. But the music touched something in her, something she had forgotten existed. The young girl in the third row, who had been watching with her eyes wide open, leaned into her mother and whispered softly, "She's really good." Her mother nodded slowly. Unable to look away, the performer's fingers slowed just a little as she transitioned into a softer part of the piece. The melody grew delicate, fragile, as if the notes themselves would break if pressed too hard. The hall leaned into the quiet sound, absorbing every tone. She breathed in deeply, her chest rising slowly as she allowed the emotion to settle inside her. Her fingers trembled for a moment, not from fear, but from the weight of what she was expressing. She held steady, guiding the melody forward. The maestro tilted his head slightly, recognizing the exact moment her emotion met technique. It was rare, very rare. Something he had seen only in performers who truly understood their own music. The hall remained completely still. Even the soft buzzing of a ceiling fan felt distant. There was no rustling of papers, no shuffling of feet, no whispers. Just her, the piano, and the emotion drifting from the stage. She lifted her hand slightly, and played a few notes so soft they almost disappeared before they reached the back of the hall. Yet somehow everyone heard them. They leaned in instinctively, not wanting to miss a single sound. Her heart beat gently in sync with the rhythm. She had created a connection, even though she didn't set out to. She wanted to share something real, and now the entire hall was sharing it with her. The audience felt something in her music, a quiet strength, a tenderness, a hint of something she had lived through, something that shaped her as a person. They didn't know her story, but they felt it. Her fingers began to rise again, moving into a new section of the melody. This time, it carried more confidence, more purpose. The soft notes grew fuller, more expressive, as if she was stepping into a brighter place. The maestro straightened in his chair, his eyes widening just a little. He heard something in her playing that made him forget he was sitting in a simple community hall. He felt the kind of inspiration he hadn't felt in years. She kept going, letting the music become a voice stronger than any words she could speak. Her left hand moved gracefully through rich chords, and her right hand layered gentle tones above them. The music flowed through her like a soft river, steady and clear. She wasn't thinking about mistakes. She wasn't thinking about the people who ignored her earlier. She wasn't thinking about how she almost didn't get a chance to perform. She was thinking about how it felt to be here, on this stage, sharing something she kept inside for so long. Her eyes stayed focused on the keys, but every now and then she lifted her gaze just enough to catch the shape of the audience. She didn't look at faces. She only sensed their stillness, and that quiet, unmoving attention gave her courage. For the first time since she stepped onto the stage, she felt truly seen. Her fingers traveled up the keyboard, creating a gentle rise in the music. The sound was hopeful, like sunlight breaking through early morning clouds. Her movements became smoother, more fluid, as if she had stepped fully into the emotion she wanted to express in the front row. A man who had been skeptical earlier leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. His face softened, the hardness around his eyes fading. He didn't expect this level of emotion in a small recital. Even the older students in the back, who had once been busy competing with each other in conversations, stood still, listening with genuine respect. They exchanged glances, but said nothing. They knew something special was happening. The melody deepened again, but in a braver way this time. Her hands pressed harder into the keys, creating stronger tones. Her posture straightened, and her shoulders relaxed. She was no longer the quiet girl sitting in the last row. She was the girl who brought a hall full of people into her world with a single melody. The maestro felt something shift inside him, a recognition, a small spark of admiration. He didn't freeze yet, not completely, but he felt the beginning of it, the first sign that this performance was not ordinary. Her fingers lifted gently from the keys for a moment, letting the last chord fade naturally into the air. The silence that followed was powerful. It wasn't empty, it was full of everything she had just expressed then. She returned her hands to the piano and began the next part of the melody, one that would soon change the atmosphere even more. She didn't know it yet, but the moment she played the next section, the maestro's entire understanding of her would shift. The room was ready, and so was she. The next morning arrived quietly, almost too quietly, as if the world itself was waiting to see what would happen next in the recital hall. The young girl woke up early, long before the sun had fully risen, because sleep never stayed long when her mind was full. She sat by the little window of her room, listening to the birds beginning their day, wondering if she would ever feel at ease with the world watching her. For a long moment, she just watched the sky change color, breathing slowly, trying to ground herself, even though the recital had already begun the day before. Today felt heavier, like something important was approaching. The hall was expecting the maestro in the afternoon, and everyone was excited. Everyone except her. She didn't know how to feel. The maestro was famous for being strict, for having ears sharp enough to catch the smallest mistake. Students respected him, feared him, and dreamed of impressing him. She was not sure she should even be there, but she also knew something inside her wanted to try. No matter how scared she felt, her mother noticed how quiet she was. She sat beside her and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. She didn't speak at first. Sometimes silence comforts better than words. After a while, she said softly, You don't have to prove anything to anyone. Just do what feels right to your heart." Her mother's voice was always gentle, calm, like warm tea on a cold morning. It helped, even though the worries still sat inside her, deep and heavy. They walked to the hall slowly. The street was almost empty, and the breeze was soft. The girl held her music sheets close to her chest, even though she knew she wouldn't need them. The melody she planned to play lived inside her. She had whispered it to herself for years, practicing when no one else was awake, playing it again and again under her breath while others chatted and laughed. It was her secret place. When they reached the recital hall, the sounds from inside were already floating out the doors. Students were practicing loudly, running their fingers up and down scales, warming up their hands, showing off little riffs to their friends. No one looked her way when she entered. Some brushed past her without noticing she was even there. She was used to it, but it still stung like it always did. The girl found a seat in the corner of the room. She did not want attention, but she also did not want to disappear completely. From the corner she could see everyone, but no one could really see her. It was a safe place. She placed her hands in her lap and waited as the instructors called out the names of students who were next to rehearse. One by one they played. Some pieces were loud, full of fast, bold movements. Others were soft and dreamy. Some players made small mistakes. Some played almost perfectly. Every time someone finished, their friends clapped loudly for them, cheering and laughing, filling the room with confidence and pride. When it was her turn, the instructor didn't call her name loudly. In fact, he barely looked up from the list. Her name was spoken so softly that a few people didn't even hear it. A boy near the front asked, "Who? Did he skip someone?" Others shrugged and continued whispering among themselves. She stood slowly, walked toward the stage, her steps so light they barely made a sound. She could hear her heartbeat echoing inside her body. She sat at the piano gently and placed her fingers on the keys. But before she could begin, one of the older students leaned toward his friend and muttered, "Why is she even playing today? She barely speaks. She probably can't even hit the right notes." They laughed quietly. She heard them. Every word. But she kept her eyes down, her breath steady. She had long learned that staying silent didn't mean she wasn't listening. Sometimes silence was strength. Then she began to play. At first the notes were soft, almost shy. She eased into the melody gently, letting it breathe. Some people in the audience kept talking, not paying attention. But then the melody shifted. It grew deeper, more emotional, as if something inside her had suddenly opened. Her fingers moved with a confidence she didn't feel in any other part of her life. The sound filled the air with warmth and sadness at the same time, a strange and beautiful mix. Slowly, the room changed. Conversations faded. A few students turned their heads. The older boy who had laughed earlier stopped mid-sentence. The instructor lowered his pen. Something in the melody held their attention like an invisible hand. She didn't look at any of them. Her eyes stayed fixed on the keys, but her mind was somewhere else, somewhere safe. Every note she played carried a memory, moments she never spoke about, feelings she never explained. The music understood her better than people did. The piece grew more intense. Her fingers moved faster, not out of stress, but out of emotion. The melody carried longing, hope, fear, and something like courage. She didn't think, she simply played. When she finally reached the last few notes, her hands slowed again, calming the room with the gentle finish. A long, quiet pause followed. No one clapped. Not because they didn't want to, but because they forgot how. They were too stunned. She lifted her hands off the keys slowly. Her breathing was heavy, her heart racing. She didn't look up. She didn't need praise. She only wanted to leave the stage quietly and return to her safe place. But before she could stand, someone walked into the hall. The door opened softly, and in stepped the maestro. He was supposed to arrive later in the afternoon, but he had come early to check the preparations. No one expected him. The instructors stood up in surprise, whispering to each other. The students quickly straightened their posture. He didn't seem to notice any of them. Instead, he stopped in the doorway, frozen in place. His eyes were fixed on the girl sitting at the piano. The last echoes of her melody had not yet fully faded. He had heard the ending, just those final few seconds, but they were enough. She didn't know he was watching. She simply stepped off the bench and walked back to the corner, as quietly as she always did. The other students followed her with their eyes, still shocked by how someone so unnoticed could hold so much power in her hands. The maestro's expression was unreadable. He scanned the room, then his gaze settled on the piano again, almost as if the instrument itself had spoken. The instructor walked over to welcome him, but the maestro raised a hand, stopping him. He looked around and asked in a calm but firm voice who played just now. No one answered at first. They were too stunned. The instructor swallowed hard and pointed toward the girl sitting quietly in the corner. She lowered her eyes when she realized they were looking at her. The maestro didn't move right away. He simply stared at her, not with confusion or judgment, but with something closer to curiosity, deep, heavy curiosity. Finally, he spoke again. His voice slow and deliberate. "I need to hear her play that melody." From the beginning, silence fell over the hall again. Even those who had ignored her, mocked her, or had never noticed she was there, could feel that something important was about to happen. The girl lifted her head slightly, unsure if she heard him right. Her heart beat faster than before. She wasn't ready for this kind of attention. She wasn't ready for the eyes of the maestro. But he stood waiting, not rushing her, not pressuring her. Simply waiting with the quiet patience of someone who had discovered something rare. The room watched her. Every single person. Her hands trembled. Her breath shook. But she stood. Slowly, step by step. She walked toward the piano again. The hall went silent, and the maestro leaned forward, completely still, waiting for a melody he felt he had. He's been searching for his entire life. The hall was so quiet that she could hear her own breath echoing in her ears. She stood in front of the piano again, unsure of how she even reached the stage. Her legs felt light, almost numb, as if her body was moving without asking her. The maestro waited a few steps away, hands behind his back, eyes focused entirely on her. The entire room watched her every move, though she avoided looking at anyone. She sat down slowly, smoothing her skirt nervously before placing her hands gently on the keys. Her fingers trembled. She wasn't shaking because she doubted her melody. She was shaking because for the first time in her life, the world wasn't ignoring her. The attention felt heavy, like carrying a weight she didn't know how to hold. The maestro spoke quietly, so only she could hear. "Don't rush. Take a moment." His voice wasn't strict or cold. It wasn't commanding. It held something warmer, something that felt like respect. She wasn't used to that. She closed her eyes for a moment and took a slow breath. She thought of home, of her mother's gentle voice, of all the mornings she practiced in silence while others slept. She thought of the small joys that kept her going, the melody she had shaped and reshaped until it felt like part of her soul. And then she began. The first note came out soft again, but not timid this time. Soft like a first heartbeat. The second note followed, then the third. The melody unfolded with a calm steadiness, like a river finding its path. Her fear began to melt away as her fingers settled into the familiar pattern. This time, she didn't play only with talent. She played with intention. Every note felt clearer. Every shift held emotion. The melody grew, blooming into something fuller, something richer than before. The maestro stood frozen. His chest rose slowly, his eyes sharp but softened with surprise. The instructors behind him exchanged glances, unsure how to process what they were witnessing. The students leaned forward in their seats, some blinking in disbelief, some feeling a quiet shame remembering how they had dismissed her earlier. The girl didn't see any of it. Her eyes stayed lowered, her world tied to the keys. She didn't need to look up to know what her music meant. For the first time, she felt the hall listening not out of politeness, not because they were required to, but because they couldn't help it. When she reached the center section of the piece, the room felt different. The melody deepened, as if carrying the weight of unspoken words. It held memories of lonely days, of being pushed aside, of walking into rooms where no one looked up. But it also held something bright, small hopes, tiny victories. The quiet strength she carried inside her, the maestro's breathing changed. He wasn't just impressed. He was moved. His forehead tightened. Not from judgment, but from emotion he didn't expect. Her fingers danced across the keys, faster and more confident. The room seemed to sway with the rise and fall of her playing. The melody rose like a voice finally speaking after years of silence. It wasn't loud, but it was powerful. Then came the final part, the soft return of the opening tune. She let the melody settle gently, like a whisper closing the story she had been telling. The last note hovered in the air for a brief second before fading completely. Silence, pure, breathless silence. She rested her hands on her lap, unsure if she should stand or wait. Her heart felt too big for her body. She didn't look at anyone. The maestro stepped forward, not quickly, not dramatically. He moved slowly, thoughtfully, as if each step meant something. He reached the edge of the piano and stood quietly. The entire room watched him, waiting for his reaction, knowing his words mattered more than anyone else's. He took a breath and asked softly, "Who taught you to play like this?" She hesitated and answered in a small voice, "I learned mostly on my own, and from listening." The maestro didn't blink. His silence felt heavy, filled with countless thoughts he wasn't ready to share. Finally he nodded once and said, "This melody, it carries truth." A murmur spread through the hall. No one had ever heard the maestro speak that way. He was known for being strict, for pointing out flaws, for demanding perfection. He rarely praised anyone, but he wasn't finished. He looked directly at her. "Play it again." Her eyes widened. She had not expected that. The instructors exchanged confused looks. The other students stiffened. Some who had mocked her earlier now felt a tightness in their chest. She nodded slowly and lifted her hands again. This time the maestro stepped closer, close enough to hear every breath she took between notes. He closed his eyes as she began to play the melody once more. She played it slightly differently, warmer, more open, as if she finally believed the audience wanted to listen halfway through. The maestro opened his eyes and looked at her hands, studying each movement with deep concentration. When she finished a second time, he didn't wait for the last note to fade. He whispered, "Extraordinary." The word floated through the hall like a spark. Students gasped. Some looked at her with new eyes, no longer seeing the quiet girl they once ignored, but someone they had underestimated entirely. The maestro turned to the instructors. "This child must not be overlooked again." His voice carried authority, but also something else, admiration. He looked back at her and asked gently, "What is your name?" She spoke softly, almost shyly, as if giving him a fragile piece of herself. He nodded. "You have a gift. A rare one. I would like to guide you if you wish. Not to change your music, never that, but to help the world hear it clearly." Her breath caught. She blinked slowly, unsure if she had heard correctly. The room watched her, waiting for her answer. She didn't speak right away. Her eyes drifted toward the back of the hall where her mother stood with her hands pressed to her mouth, eyes shining with emotion she couldn't hide. That sight gave the girl strength. She looked back at the maestro and whispered, "Yes, I'd like that." The maestro nodded as if he had expected it. "Good. Then from today, you will practice with me." The hall erupted in whispers. Some students felt proud of her. Others felt a sting of regret for ever ignoring her. But none of them could deny what they had just witnessed. The maestro stepped aside and gestured toward her gently. Not dismissing her, honoring her, she stood slowly, not out of fear, but out of wonder. As she walked off the stage for the first time, people moved aside for her. They looked at her with respect, with admiration, with something like awe. Even the older boy who had mocked her earlier stepped back, unable to meet her eyes. He felt the weight of his earlier words pressing down on him, and he knew he deserved that feeling. Her mother wrapped her arms around her tightly the moment she reached her. "I knew you had something special," her mother whispered, voice trembling. The girl didn't respond right away. She simply held on, finally allowing herself to breathe freely. The maestro approached them both, his expression calm but sincere. Your daughter has a voice that cannot be silenced, he said quietly. If she continues, she may touch many hearts. Her mother nodded, wiping a tear. Thank you for seeing her, he shook his head gently. She made herself seen. As the hall slowly emptied and the excitement settled into quiet chatter, the girl glanced back at the piano. It no longer looked like a place of fear. It looked like a place where her truth had finally been heard. She walked out of the hall with her mother beside her. Feeling different, lighter, stronger, braver, for the first time in her life, she wasn't invisible. She had played one melody, and it made the maestro freeze. It made the whole world stop and listen, and deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning of her story.